Welcome to this afternoon session at the conference. My name's Kirsty Lewin, if you didn't see the session this morning, and I'm the Partnership Manager for Local Energy Scotland, and I'm covering Laura Campbell's maternity leave. We are recording the session, but we won't record the questions and answers at the end. If you haven't done so, can you turn your cameras and mics off for the presentations, because we're getting some feedback. You'll see the little icons at the top if you're not sure how to do that. Yeah. So in this session, we're going to look at how to promote your project, whether it be a relatively small community building or a large community benefit fund. And we're going to be talking through two examples, one from Calum Watkins from Glasgow Community Energy, and you can see him on the screen at the moment. And we're also going to look at a non-energy project, and it's a cycling campaign that I'm involved in, but it's quite an interesting one in terms of what you can do on zero budget and have mass participation. We've also got Ruth Dickinson with us, who's one of our development officers, and she'll talk briefly about the new CARES How to Promote Your Project guide, which has gone up on our website in the last couple of days, and we'll put a link through to that in the chat. And that complements the existing information and case study requests that are normally attached to grant offer letters if you get grant support from CARES. We're quite a small group, so we should have a really great opportunity to have a discussion at the end, and you'll also have a chance to ask questions, particularly to Calum, given his energy project, and if there's anything on my own, we can also run through that. Now, before I start, Ruth is going to run a little poll, either as a poll or as a chat. I'm not quite sure which, but she's going to do that now. So if you can just participate in that.
Hopefully you will all be able to see a poll up on your screen. One very simple question, two answers. If you could just click one of the circles and submit, that would be great. Thank you.
And Ruth, if you could just tell us what the answer to that is once you've got them in.
So looking at the answers, we have 20% are very confident and 80% not very confident. So thank you for responding to that.
So we're hoping that by the end of this session, that's going to move a bit so that you'll have a lot more confidence. So I'm just going to introduce Calum. Calum Watkins is the Director and Technical Lead at Glasgow Community Energy, and he was elected as a Director while studying electrical and mechanical engineering at the University of Strathclyde. He now works at Smarter Grid Solutions in Glasgow, developing renewable energy engineering solutions across the UK and North America. And he also volunteers in his capacity as a STEM ambassador, organising solar energy workshops in partnership with schools and community groups. And with that, I'd like to head over to Calum, and he's going to give you a presentation now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kirsty. Is the sound okay coming through? Just want to double check.
Yep, it's all good.
You can see my slides up here. Fantastic. So thank you for coming along to the session on how to promote your project. The poll voting, but as you'll find out from our project and from what we've been doing, some of this is really difficult, and we don't have all the answers. But hopefully I can give you a flavour of what we're up to in terms of the work we're doing in Glasgow, and my particular involvement, but also what some of the rest of the team are doing there. So just a kind of a background, I'm going to talk through what our project is, how we began, and then some of the more recent stuff around how we're engaging local people, different organisations in the work that we're doing. So have some thoughts, some questions in mind. It'd be great to answer any of your questions about your projects, how you're thinking about and seeking to promote them in your own context. So firstly, just to kind of, as a setting the scene, all the work that we do really in community energy focuses on these goals, the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. Our particular area of focus is on clean and affordable energy, number 7. But the thing about community energy is, as you may know already, is that it has a lot of impacts much more broadly than just about developing energy projects. So we're looking at things around number 4, quality education. I mentioned, or Kirsty mentioned about STEM. I'll be talking a bit about that and how we're using that as a way of promoting our projects. And there's lots of other ways in which community energy can provide these different things. And number 17, partnerships. That's really critical. So working with other organisations like Local Energy Scotland and others that are involved in the sector is really critical to what we're doing. So, wind you back to quite some time ago when I was a student, probably about 2012, no, a bit later than that, 2018, where I was doing a student project and we were looking at essentially mapping vacant and derelict land. So the map you can see on the right is of Glasgow, and it's highlighting all of the areas of the city that are vacant or derelict. And back then, about 9% of Glasgow had vacant and derelict land. And we were looking at whether we could do energy projects to provide community benefit, so funding for projects in areas of deprivation. And what we found was that a lot of that vacant derelict land was in close proximity to those vacant sites. So we went along to a couple of conferences, we spoke to people from Scottish Enterprise, and we got lots of information and learning about the kind of things we were doing. So that was part of my engineering studies, was really developing this idea of community energy in Glasgow, and thinking about ways in which we can stimulate finance for local projects. And so lots of mapping, as you can see, pictures, looking at different areas. This is a part of Glasgow called Easterhouse, which is in the northeast of Glasgow. And we looked a lot at sites here, did some site surveys, went to visit them. And so it was really, I got probably too interested in vacant derelict land for about a year and a half. But our real focus is on how can we use community energy as a vehicle for enabling community activism and local ownership of community energy. And I'll get onto that a bit more in terms of how our model and structure works. So in the meantime, this is our chair, Ellie, on the left, and she was doing something called the Radical Renewable and Art Activism Fund, or RAF for short, which was really looking about, can we build a wind turbine that will power Glasgow, or part of Glasgow, and provide community funding? So from a very different perspective, looking at how potentially arts communities could have an alternative source of funding, because often they're funded from fossil fuel companies. So we got together and a number of others in kind of support of what we were doing to start thinking about developing this cooperative. So I'm using the word cooperative because that's what we are. We're a volunteer organisation. We have some directors, we have lots of members, and we allow all of the projects that we do to be coordinated within that environment. So in terms of my own research, we went and had a look at some other community projects. So this is my wife on the left. We went to the grand opening of Aracher Community Hydro, which was supported by Local Energy Scotland. You can see that on the right, as well as some other organisations. And they really wanted to build the hydro so that they could provide money for the local community hall. So we went up there, we did some work with the school locally and met with some of the people who'd been developing it, just to kind of get a sense of what was this all about. So I think, coming to this session hopefully is helpful in terms of, this is the journey that we did. We took the same approach of going and finding out about other projects, how they promoted them, and then we went from there. Another project we looked at, really successful in Edinburgh, was a solar cooperative there, where they put solar on, I think originally it was 26 schools. Kirsty was actually quite involved in that, so if you've got any questions about that, she's the person to ask. And we thought, wow, this looks phenomenal. They put solar panels on schools. So bringing you back to the vacant derelict land idea, we didn't really get very far with it. We got some funding from Local Energy Scotland, and we looked at the feasibility of putting solar panels on those sites. And actually, it turned out that we weren't able to do that at the time. So we went to look at schools and we got engaged with the council. And I'm going to show you a brief kind of timeline history of the work that we've been doing. But what I really want to highlight here is all of the kind of engagement points that we had with communities, or stakeholders, or people that were interested in the project. So 2015 to 2022 is our kind of timeline. And so right at the very beginning, Ellie, who I mentioned earlier, did a crowdfunding campaign. So that was really about stimulating the kind of initial findings, and they did a report and they looked at what sort of things can we do. So that happened right at the beginning. And then kind of later on, we developed some solar energy workshops, which I'll be talking about in a second, which was really about engaging with the schools and the communities that we wanted to support. We then had some work with the Pollokshields Trust, which is a fantastic community organisation in the south of Glasgow, looking at energy and renewables. We did a community energy fair up in Easthouse, which I mentioned earlier. So bringing people together to talk about energy and challenges around energy. And then we also did our community share offer, which I will talk about in a second. So our main kind of goal and focus are these kind of three areas that we are interested in, which is about, firstly, enabling. We want to be a group that enables people, our groups, to have their own energy from the renewables. So we've done some projects with renewables. Secondly, it's about education. So we've developed workshops that we take into schools. We talk about energy. We talk about energy access in places where there isn't energy in the same way that we have it. And we work with those schools to understand how can we help them in terms of the next generation of people who are going to come into this challenging but with great opportunities. And then the third part is about empowerment. So we really want this energy that we generate and the projects that we make to be owned by the communities. And that's why we are cooperative, and that allows us to do that. So some of the things that we tried early on. So back in 2019, we did an energy workshop series. So each team members from our group decided to pick something that they were passionate about, that they knew something about. We ran a series up in the northeast of Glasgow, essentially on different topics around community energy. And we put lots of work into it, and we flyered lots, we put lots out on social media, and we found that actually we didn't really meet that many people through doing that. And partly that was because of the way in which we publicised the projects that we were doing. And typically the types of communities we were working with were much more in terms of face-to-face meetings and one-to-ones, and finding people who had real connections within the communities that we wanted to help. So although we created this like really good tool, it wasn't necessarily the right audience that it was geared at. So it wasn't so great. And that's okay. Some things that you try don't work out, and that's okay. It was a really interesting concept, and it might be something that works in a different context from where we were working as well. By the way, we do have all these content, so if it's something that's of interest, we can go and have a conversation about providing some of these resources as well. So what really did work was actually going into schools, and we did a series of schools energy workshops, probably from the early 2019, and we're still doing them at the moment. And these are really around helping these young people to engage with energy, energy systems, so solar panels and batteries and fans. It's really good fun. They get really into it and interactive, and we've been doing these quite a lot in the last couple of years as a way of kind of really focusing on information sharing and education, which I think is a huge part of community energy. It's not just about the projects, but it's about how we communicate what we're doing to those in the wider community. And those are really successful, which is why we're still doing them. But I want to get onto the project side of things as well. So back in 2020, we finally installed some solar projects. So you might remember the timeline, 2015 was when things started. So if you're thinking, oh, it's taking forever, then it does sometimes take a long time to get things to work. So we had two sites that we were able to install solar panels on. One was Glendale Primary School, which is in Pollokshields, with the help from the Pollokshields Trust. And then the other one was in Easterhouse, a school called Ashton. So those were our sites. I've got a couple more pictures of the installations. So we had some fantastic sunny weather. Who'd have thought in Glasgow? Places for putting these in. We got some funding from Local Energy Scotland, from CARES, and we also get some funding from Scottish Power Energy Networks. They had a Green Economy Fund, and we also raised some money through a community share offer. So community share offers are slightly different to crowdfunding in that you are expected to give, the money is going to come back to the people who invest. So that's the model of most of the community energy projects that we've come across, is they raise the shares to pay for the panels, for the the energy system, and then from generating energy and selling that to the buildings, we're able to make the money back and then provide that to both the members who've invested and the communities that the energy systems are generating in. So just in numbers really quickly, because I'm an engineer, it's got to be in there. These are the types of numbers that we were looking at in terms of our project. So lots of energy, lots of panels. We were actually up there last weekend cleaning the panels, because panel cleaning is quite expensive. So we did that as a volunteer organisation. And we have a contract with the council who owns the schools to sell them energy for 20 years, which is great. And then we have 178 members, so people and community organisations who've invested in to allow us to build these projects. And what we get from that is around about £5,000 of annual community benefit, so money that we can use in the community. So the kind of big publicity angle for us here was, how do we find these members? So we had a mailing list, we had information that we presented on social media, we did lots of publicity stuff, which I'll bring up in a sec. But we also created a fantastic video with the Pollock Shields Trust, which I'm just going to play now for you to have a look at, which was telling the people what the project's about and how to get involved.
Solar panels in Glasgow, we must be crazy. But look, the sun's out today. The sun is out today.
From being up here, you can kind of see all these roofs. Some of them have solar panels, which is fantastic. Most of them don't. And you think, well, how can we all be empowered to actually make use of this technology free from the sun?
For Glasgow City Council, they've set the target to get to net zero by 2030. So there's a huge job to do with decarbonising our energy supply across the city.
The system we use here is one of our society for the benefit of the community. It will sell electricity both to the council and to the grid. It would hope to make a small profit, and that small profit will go directly to the people of this area.
You've got a whole generation of children grown up into a world that we have messed up, and that they have the burden of that. And I think it's really important for them and their mental health to know actually that it's not all on them, and that we are taking steps to remedy past mistakes and to work with the technology that we now have available to us to fix some of the messes we've made.
Yeah, we are disrupting the way the energy system works. We have these massive big multinationals selling energy to houses, making a huge profit. So we're coming in with a completely different model that local people can invest in and benefit directly from. Anyone in the local area can invest in this solar technology, help address the climate emergency head on, and benefit the local community. It's a brilliant solution.
Cool. So there you go. Hopefully a little bit of a flavour of how we tried to promote our project, what we were doing, and how we got people involved. So people were able to go to our website, they would be able to sign up and be able to invest. And people could invest anywhere from £50 up to £500. And we capped it quite low because we were really keen to have more members involved. So moving on, some of the other stuff that we got into was publicity, particularly around COP26 last year in Glasgow. everyone who came to Glasgow and Googled Energy Glasgow basically came to us, which was fantastic. So we had lots of people interested in emailing us saying, can we do interviews? So the photo on the left was somebody from Solar Power Europe, which is an advocacy group, and they wanted to talk to us about energy. And we went to the Green Zone. We were able to visit some of the work that different organisations are doing, and we even got the city convener for Glasgow to come up on the roof with his medal and take some photos. So there's lots of things that we were able to do around publicity, and we get invitations from different people doing studying, people at different universities who are interested in what we're doing, and part of that, promotion is me sharing what we're doing with you, and I think that's such an important role that we have of having a successful project. It's quite small, but it's successful, and being able to show actually this is something that you can do in your own context. So the other thing to say is what we mentioned there was that there is some money that goes to communities. So some of those 26 community organisations that we mentioned as who have invested in the cooperative, and we really want to support them, particularly when they're local to our sites. So we've selected for the first 5 years to provide finance for several local community organisations. And that's another way that we can present and promote our work, is by saying, look, this is actually really beneficial, not just because it's clean energy and it's making it cheaper to run the schools, but actually there is this money that's available for local community projects. And part of our publicity from that will be actually saying, look, here's all the things that we're able to support from having community energy and lots of different types of organizations that can make use of that. I guess one thing I want to say as well is some of this is really, it's difficult, it's time consuming, and it was great when I was a student. I had lots of time. It was part of the projects that I was interested in, but it can be a challenge to get things off the ground. And I think one of the things that we really benefit from is just talking to people in the energy sector, in the community energy sphere. There's brilliant people from Local Energy Scotland who can help you. They have local development workers in different parts of Scotland. We also had some support from an organisation called Energy for All, and they help establish energy cooperatives up and down the UK. So there's lots of ways in which organisations can help you develop projects. So hopefully that's given you some food for thought, and something to go away and think about whether you can do something around community energy or whatever community projects you're interested in.
That's great, Calum. Thank you so much. If you could just stop sharing your screen, and then Ruth will take a couple of questions from participants.
We've got any questions anybody would like to ask Calum at this point, or maybe you'd like to say them for the end? If you... Sorry, go ahead.
I can't find the part to write them down just now, so can I just verbally ask you a question, Calum?
Please do. Yeah.
So my question is two things. Within when you were developing that and you had shares, and you said there were 50 to 500, were any of those shares allocated to something within the community that was an organization as opposed to an individual? Were any of the shareholders an organization or a company?
Yeah, we had 26 organizations become members. And so the way the cooperatives work are we are able to, so no matter how many shares somebody buys or an organization buys, they have one vote. So there's no majority shareholders. And we encouraged anybody who is in the local Glasgow area to invest. So those organisations that I mentioned at the end who were receiving funding were actually organisations that bought shares in the cooperative.
Okay, and then another question I have is, when you had returned funding or you had identified funding for the community return, what was that it might have been there within your figures, but I didn't catch it. What was that as a percentage of your overall profit from the year? Was it like a 5% return or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we publish our accounts on our website, so that the kind of full breakdown of that will be there. It's probably, I think it's over 50% of what our income was for that year. Because some of that funding goes to paying to having money set aside for the shareholders, so the people who invested. Some of that money is for operating and maintaining the systems. So we need to have money set aside for if there's a windy day and something breaks or something goes wrong on the system. And we have a couple of contracts with commercial developers to help us do that as best as we can, to make sure that we are managing them properly, because our role as a board isn't as the technical leads, although some of us have a technical background, others don't. And our role is there as the kind of community glue to bring things together. So we will always call on professional services to develop new projects and to build new systems, and then connect them and partner with communities to finance them.
Okay, am I still allowed to ask further questions?
Yeah,
can I ask you, you obviously are an organization, okay, a co-op. You had to persuade or not Glasgow City Council that you could occupy their building with your panels. How did you go about that?
Yeah, great question. So I think we had a lot of engagement with the City Council over many years, and we had, so one of the things that we did was, when there was a feed-in tariff for, which is the government subsidy for renewable energy, and the council were keen for us to do the project, but they weren't sure about whether or not they could give exclusivity, or they had to kind of go out to tender. But because we had the feed-in tariff, we had an exclusivity with the council for those sites. And the two schools there were both owned by the council, so they weren't private investment ones. So that was slightly easier in terms of contracting. But we have a relationship with the energy services. So the council centrally manages energy for all of their schools. We had to draw up a contract with the council for the energy supply for 20 years. And that was a fairly time-intensive process, and to build up that kind of contracting arrangement with them. And so it's 2 years after that now, and we haven't been able to continue to build new projects with the council because they've had a really high turnover of staff. They're not sure about whether they can procure in the same way because we don't have exclusivity, because there's no feed-in tariff. So we're going back to them and saying, look, we've delivered this project, look at all the benefits for the community, and can you give us some more schools to do? So there is a bit of that. Well, somebody asked me recently, oh, isn't it much easier now because you've done it once? And it's not. It's still the same process of building that trust relationship with local authorities. So part of our kind of next steps potentially would be to focus less on the council and more on community-owned buildings, faith buildings, which we've done quite a lot of work with on a kind of small scale, and then also working with other types of energy consumer. So the council is one area, but it's not. They have a lot of buildings. It's great, but there may be processes in place that make it more difficult. And the Edinburgh project I mentioned had a lot of support from within the council, and they had councillors on the board, and there was quite a lot of kind of, I guess, council ownership over the projects there, and kind of more involvement. So we've got a slightly different relationship with the council in Glasgow, but they very much support us in principle. They've got a mandate to look at community energy as part of their climate emergency strategy. So there's things around the kind of political side of things which we had to push quite heavily, working with councillors to help us deliver the project in the timescales that we had.
And my final question, if that's okay, is
hang on, is that Julie? Is that still you? Would you mind? I think that's probably enough at the moment. If you, because we've got another hand up and we were halfway through the session, but we might be able to take it offline if you've got some more questions from Calum.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you had a question from, is it Jimmy?
Yeah, thanks very much. Calum, sorry if I missed this, and I do apologise, but you mentioned that you had a good relationship with the council, and because of the support that was coming, external funding. How does it stack up purely and simply in a business case to reduce the cost of energy? Can you do it simultaneously? Can you decarbonise and reduce the cost of energy, or at least keep the cost of energy equal?
I think so. One of the things that we've been able to do with the council is the contract we have with them is a fixed fee for all the energy we generate. So essentially, we're enabling them to reduce their costs and reduce the amount of the reliance they have on other energy sources. So it's kind of doing both of those things. And I think communities which can community buildings present a really good opportunity for particularly solar energy, because it's sunny in the daytime. That's when the energy is being used. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. It's much more difficult to do it with people's homes and domestic properties. And it's also easier to do it with a site or a building that's got a single owner.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Calum. And yeah, a lot of information in there, and lots of things to follow up. And what I was particularly interested in is that you know, when you've tried things out and they haven't worked, you acknowledge that and think, well, we might be able to use that in a different way. And that's a really important learning, because sometimes these things aren't going to work, and that doesn't matter. Yeah, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk about a completely different type of project. So for those of you who've come in a bit later, I'm going to talk about a cycling project, but very much focus on the promotional activities of that. And at the end, we'll hopefully have time for a bit of a discussion around promotion, and we'd be particularly interested in hearing from people in the audience about what you've tried and what's worked and what hasn't. So we'll try to make time for that. So in the meantime, Calum, if you just turn your camera off, and I will try to show you a slideshow. If it doesn't work, just let me know. Okay, can everyone see that? Yeah, okay. So this is about a campaign called the InfraSisters, and I'm going to tell you about how we built and promoted a cycling campaign using memorable events and social media on zero budget. And that's perhaps the most important part. So what's always interesting is, how does a project get started? Who has the idea? And what you heard from Calum was how they got started way back when he was a student and looking at derelict land, and how that ended up leading to a solar project. And this one is also interesting. So I was cycling down an isolated path in Edinburgh. For those of you who live in Edinburgh, it's called the Innocent, and there's a picture of a man on it at the moment. And something creepy happened to me on my way, and I was afraid. And while nothing actually happened, it did frighten me, and I wondered how safe that path was and whether I should be cycling on it at night. And so I put a tweet out, and you'll see the sort of lower tweet there saying, you know, this thing happened to me. It wasn't very nice. And then a couple of days later, I thought, well, maybe we should sort of try reclaiming the streets and run a bit of a campaign around this. And put that tweet out, and lots of people that I didn't know replied to it. They sent me direct messages, and that's how this campaign started. Now, at the time, when you're thinking about promoting a project, whether it's an energy project or a cycling project or any other community project, the sort of wider context is really important. So, for example, in energy, we're thinking about the climate crisis and the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis. In the context of this particular cycling campaign, there were a number of different things happening. So Edinburgh had no network of on-road cycling infrastructure, barely at all. So most people are cycling in traffic, which feels very unsafe, particularly for women. We do have extensive off-road routes, but as you could see from the picture, a lot of them are beautiful in the summer, but they're really isolated, and often they don't have escape routes. And women are having to choose between dangerous drivers and traffic on the main roads or to risk going down these isolated paths. And very sadly, at the time this campaign started, male violence against women was a major thing in the media, and there'd been some really tragic violent cases. And there's a picture of Sabina Nessa here, but there was also the murder of Sarah Everard and many other women, and so that was in the utmost of many women's minds at the time that this campaign started. So when you're thinking about developing a promotional campaign with impact, there's a number of things to think about. And when we had our first meeting, we didn't know each other, so it was during COVID, and a whole lot of people got together. And we all talked a bit about online. And what we agreed was that we should do something that was really highly visible and that would involve a lot of participation and that would have some kind of social media presence. And so we agreed to do a mass night ride through Edinburgh city streets on a Friday night, and that would be in live traffic, not closing roads and without police or council support. We would link it to the UN's 16 days of activism. So again, it's quite useful to link to things when you're doing promotional activity. So for example, this week is Scotland's Climate Week. So it's really useful for us to link the conference to that. If you're running a local energy project, you can think about what are the bigger things that you can link to. And the 16 days of activism was about ending gender-based violence against women. We agreed the name of our event, which would be Light Up the Night, and we learned lessons from that and later changed it. But yeah, coming up with something that works well on social media is really helpful so that people remember the name of it. So either the event or the group. And then we were very clear about what we wanted to achieve. Now, in this particular case, we were calling on the council to do 3 specific things, which actually could be summarised into one thing. And that was about creating safe on-road cycle infrastructure that was safe and comfortable for women and girls at night. So that was the campaign ask. There's a little bit more detail on the slide there. And we stuck to that and have stuck to that throughout the whole campaign. So when you're thinking about impact, you're thinking, in this case, we were thinking about, well, what will influence decision makers, but also what will attract people to come in and join us. And we wanted people to join us on 2 levels, really. One was to volunteer. So as Calum said, you know, in any big project or campaign, there's a lot of work to do. So the more people you can have involved, the better. But we also wanted to attract people in, and that was getting lots and lots of people along to the night ride. And so we did that, or planned that, so we would have a lot of visual impact. So we would ask people to light up their bikes with fairy lights, and we would also have music. So we would have cargo bikes at the beginning of the ride and the end of the ride, and the music would make it seem like a carnival. Another feature of this that attracted people in was that the event and the campaign was led and organised entirely by women, although everyone could participate in the event itself. But that made us stand out from other things. We had good logos and graphics, and there's always someone in your community that's brilliant at graphic design, so go out and find those people. This is one of the posters that we had, you'll see in the slide. Now actually there's probably a bit too much information in that, and we simplified over time as we learned how to do it. Social media activity is important. Most of the cycling campaigning in Edinburgh happens on Twitter. So we did a lot of stuff on Twitter and a lot less on Facebook, but we also used Eventbrite and Facebook to advertise the event to get out to as many people as possible. And we also did a media release. So in thinking about maximising involvement and participants, like how do you get out to people? And as Calum said, like some things work and some don't. Now for us, word of mouth actually was the best. So we just told everyone we knew. We put regular calls out on Twitter and Facebook. We contacted all the community groups we knew and the campaign organisations that would have an interest in what we were doing within Edinburgh, in order to get people to come along on this night ride. We contacted the cycle shops and cycle organisations. We went out and looked for influential women who had an interest either in male violence against women or active travel and cycling. We contacted all of our councillors and MSPs, and we got quite a bit of interest, and actually from all the political parties, so that was great. And we wrote pre-event articles in our local newspaper. We made little film clips, just little film clips with smartphones, nothing fancy, and did some radio interviews. So these are some pictures of the event. It was beyond our wildest dreams. About 170 people came along. The weather was amazing. We looked like a carnival basically as we went through the city, and no one could quite believe it. We had huge support there were quite a lot of people out in the street. It was a Friday night, so there's a lot of people going out to clubs, bars, and they were waving and singing, and most drivers were really supportive. There was a lot of people brought their children along, and you can see some of the kids in the lower corner on the left there, and then some sort of volunteers associated with the campaign. They lit up the trees in the meadows. So if you know Edinburgh, you'll know the meadows. If you don't, it's a really big park in the city centre, and without permission, because you just do this stuff and ask later, they lit up the trees for us. So as everyone came back into the park, having had this amazing ride, we came through this sort of bower of colours. So it was quite an amazing spectacle, and extremely empowering for everyone who came along on it. And a lot of the women said to us that they'd never ridden at night on Edinburgh streets before, and this was the first time that they had done it. So we got amazing media coverage, more than we could handle actually. So we were on local radio, on local television, twice or three times I think on STV, on Free to View television. We appeared all over the local papers and the Daily Record and MSN News. Lots and lots of social media coverage, and again having that hashtag meant it spread like wildfire. So we were getting picked up in the States, in Europe, in Canada, and Australia, New Zealand. And I wrote a blog, and that got more hits than any other blog I had written. So there was something about this campaign which just happened to be at the right time, with the right message that seemed to work. Working with the media, just a few lessons here before I finish. Journalists are completely unpredictable. So sometimes they'll pick up stuff and sometimes they won't. If they don't worry. It's not your fault. If they don't, it may be that there's just something more interesting on the day. We had to learn a lot about deadlines, broadcast times, and that we hadn't understood. So for example, our ride was at 7:30 in the evening, I think, but actually the STV Edinburgh broadcast at 6 o'clock. So we had to do pre-ride interviews and then provide film to STV later so that they could use that themselves. We weren't quite ready for all the media requests, and so we were a bit overwhelmed by it and doing stuff sort of back to back. We did TV interviews and survived. So none of us had ever done a TV interview before, and so that is scary, but it was actually fine. And so, you know, every one of you would be able to do that. We did spend far too much time with one journalist, 2 or 3 days of time wasted, and she wanted to take a particular angle. She was from a big broadcaster and we were trying to satisfy her. And in the end, we realized actually what she wanted us to do didn't really align with what our key message was. So we we moved away from her in the end, and that was a really good lesson for us. And again, thinking about what you're doing is, you know, if a broadcaster wants you to take a route that you don't want to take, you can say no, and that's fine. We made a film, and again, this is about being really strategic. So if you're running something big, then you want its impact to last more than one day. So obviously Calum had showed a film, and when we chose the route for the bike ride, we made sure we had iconic sites all the way around, so the castle and the Parliament and Hollywood Park. And we also asked people to take clips for us and stills. And so we gathered all of that together, and it was put together by one of our campaigners, Eve, and the music that's on that film became our signature tune, if you like, or our anthem. And so I won't show the film today, but it's a great thing and worth watching. Yeah. So after the ride, we had a debrief. So it's always really important to do evaluation, either formal or informal, when you're promoting stuff, so that you know what's working and what isn't. We developed a new brand, so we called ourselves the InfraSisters rather than Light Up the Night, which was a bit clearer about our message. And you can just see the brand on the back of the tabards here. We renamed our rides to Our Streets, Our Nights. So we went on to do another ride. We invested a little bit of money in tabards. We got a donation for that, but that first ride we had no budget at all, so it was done on zero. And then the second ride we did was centered around International Women's Day. So again, thinking about what can you link to. We expanded our promotion and leaflets, and we got a lot more volunteers involved. But also we got a lot less press interest, and probably that was because it was the second ride. So just final slide here. So just thinking about promotion lessons. So on the right, you see this is our Twitter account. So this campaign is still under a year old, and we already picked up 1,000 followers. It's really important to keep a clear focus, to be strategic in terms of thinking about, you know, how can you make your impact? Like, you know, if you do one event, how can you make that last over time? As Calum said, you know, do what works, discard what doesn't matter. If you've tried it, doesn't work, try something else. Don't worry if media pickup is unpredictable. Sometimes you'll get it and sometimes you won't. You can learn on the way. So none of us knew how to run a campaign like this. We all just learned by doing. You can do a lot with no money on promotion, especially in social media. Volunteers come and go, and that's the same in most energy projects, I think, as well. So you will have people who are able to put in a lot of time, you know, part of the journey, and then other times they'll have caring responsibilities or work responsibilities and they won't be able to. And so just be really cognizant of that when you're thinking about managing these projects. And then finally, think about the capacity you've got when you're doing promotion and try not to overreach. And so we run a Twitter account, but we don't run a Facebook account because we don't have capacity to manage it. And we have a website, but we don't really manage to keep it up to date as we would like, because again, we don't have the capacity. So that's all I want to say about that. Our next ride is at the beginning of November, so we're just starting to plan for that, and we're hoping that we can sort out the on-road cycle infrastructure for women and girls so that we don't have to do the rides anymore. So thank you for that. Could maybe take one question, but I'd like to use the rest of the time to talk about promoting energy projects so that we can get back to that.
Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask Kirsty at this point in time, or would you like to save them until the end of the session? Because there was a lot of really good information in there, Kirsty, so thank you for that, and a really, really good project to sort of see how it started and where you're at now.
So we could, if you want, you can turn your cameras on now so that we can see you. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So does anyone want to share with us your own promotion stories or how you've been getting on in local projects, your own hints and tips? So I think we'll maybe move to, if not, Ruth's got a short presentation to do on our own resource. So Ruth, we could just quickly move to that, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I will just share my screen. Can everybody see that all right?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks. I was going to take silence as a yes. That's perfect. Thanks, Kirsty. So I'll just quickly go through how to promote your project, and this is from a local Energy Scotland point of view. Kirsty will put the link up as we have some new advice and guidance, sort of acknowledging the sort of the community and renewable energy scheme support and promoting your project from a local Energy Scotland point of view. So I'll take you through this quickly. And I should, like I say, all of this information will be available on our website at the end of today, if not before. So promoting your project really should start at the same time as your project itself, and that's not when the physical things are actually happening on site, but right at the very start of the project concept that you have. The best way to get your local community, prospective funders and supporters on board is to showcase your ideas and ambitions right from the very start and to bring people along with you on the journey. And I think that's a lot of what Kirsty and Calum have been saying. From a local Energy Scotland point of view, at the point in your project when you have been successful in obtaining a grant from us through this, then you will be issued with what we call our grant offer letter. And this sets out all of the terms and conditions and information around your project, including what you need to do with regards to publicity and mentioning local Energy Scotland, cares, etc. within that. It is really easy to get caught up in all of the physical aspects of a project, and the promotional side sometimes can get lost. But it really is just as important to continue to promote both your project and acknowledge the sources of support and funding you have received in order to enable the project come to fruition. As Kirsty was saying, with the best will in the world, you can put some information together for journalists and they won't use it all. And that, I've often found the case being where stories have been highlighted, but the sources of support have not. That's not something that you have control over, so don't worry about it. But where you can acknowledge that support through Facebook pages and information you have control over, it's great if you can do that. It is really good practice, and honestly, it's not that onerous. So how to action cares or community and renewable energy support. So where possible, it's really good to acknowledge this as often as possible. And this is in media releases, on social media and on any other promotional activity. Try to avoid acronyms as much as possible. Where you do use them, use the full title to start with. So we would use the Community and Renewable Energy Scheme, and then you can abbreviate to CARES afterwards if you need to do that. The only exception to this is really on social media, where obviously you have a character limit. So here it is acceptable to use abbreviations right from the very start. Logos, we can provide those if you need them, so please do just ask. Please like, share and follow on our social media channels, and feel free to tag us into any posts about your project. We'd love to help you share your story and help you celebrate your successes. Also, if you are planning to talk about your project and the support you've received from us at an event, then please let us know, because we'd be happy to support you where possible to do this. Case studies, they've been mentioned again today, but they are really, really important and very, very useful source of information. And our website has a wealth of these case studies for you to read. They provide a really rich source of information and often a point of contact for other groups seeking to undertake a similar project, such as Calum was talking about earlier on, and Kirsty. They are also a good way for you to document your journey. These are two very different projects that have used various platforms and types of publicity for their projects. So the two shown here are our Dross Community Hall, who put on solar PV, and then Kenley Parish Church, who've put in air source heat pumps. So two very different types of projects, two very different types of buildings. But please have a look at our website for a full list of all of our case studies. Hints and tips. As we said right at the very start, promotion is a key component of your project. Depending on the size of your project and your capacity will determine to a large extent how much and what sort of engagement you can undertake and what you feel comfortable with. You don't need to try and do everything, but rather do what works for you. There are two main areas to look at. What do you want to promote and where do you want to promote it? So think about the messages you want to get across. For example, what actually is your project? What are you hoping to achieve? Who has helped you and been involved in the project journey? When it comes to where to promote, then you need to think about things like social media, as it is a great way of spreading the news, and a Facebook or Instagram account, for example, are fairly easy to set up and maintain. Have a look to see what works already in your area. Do you need a website? Can your project have a web page and another organisational website already operating in your community, for example? Whatever type of online promotional tools you use, it is vitally important that you keep these up to date. Out-of-date information or sites that don't work properly are not the best advert for your project. You could also look at using posters, newsletters, in-person events, word of mouth, and the list goes on. There's not one size that fits all. It really is trying things to see what works for you and then going with that. And then finally, thank you and any questions. As I say, all of this information is found on our website, so please do have a look. And if you have any questions or queries, then please get in touch because we'd really love to hear from you.